Hey guys, Brian here from Starlite. Hope everybody out there is doing well. And today, what we've got is the roundtable for Starlight Pulp Review number 6, which just came out in June. And it is a collection of 10 shorts with one novella. And we've got, what do we got? For seven of the authors here. And as well as myself, I'm in it as well. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the stories and a little bit about where they came from and things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. Daniel, I'm going to put you on the spot quickly. Yeah, I know.
Great.
I know. You're welcome.
You know how
So
much I like to talk.
so we've got you have dizzy business in this, yeah?
Yeah.
And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to talk briefly not only about Dizzy Business where it came from, but also because we like I mentioned before we have been chatting quite a bit recently. I know that you've put a collection of these stories together as well. So why don't you first off talk about Dizzy Business and then kind of move into the collection as well.
Um, so for yeah, Brian kind of Brian found me in a bookstore, like randomly. He found my first novel, which is what he's reissuing, and asked if I had any short stories. And I hadn't written a short story in a long time. I've had a career as a screenwriter for a long time. And then I kind of transitioned to books, but I'd sort of given up on short stories a long time ago, and I hadn't really written any new ones for a long time. So uh, I wrote one, and he liked it, and we kind of went from there. This one, I read an article in the LA Times about a year ago uh, that was basically this story. It was the bare bones of this story, and it was so crazy and jumbled. The story itself, there were so many questions that I wanted to ask about who these people were. It was very incomplete. It was the bare bones of what Dizzy Business is. But I was really interested in this woman who got swept up in a weird Mexican mafia jailhouse scam and then let go. Just she was like 4 days and then she was let go. And the article didn't really explain or make any of the connections. So it kind of stuck with me for a while. And when I was trying to think of something to write for this to submit for this issue, I came back to it and I got really interested in Rita and Muncie, and I really didn't know where it was going to go. I knew how it ended, but and I was also really fascinated by how these jailhouse gangs control people on the outside. And it's still, I have to say, it still seems insane to me that you would allow yourself to be run by someone who's doing life at Pelican Bay or somewhere. If anyone wants to explain it to me, please do. So using that as a premise, I crafted a story out of that, and I'm really happy it's in the book, and I'm always amazed by the other stories I read. I've only gotten through half the book so far, but this one is amazing. Number 6, it's just amazing. And what Brian was talking about was a story that I did, I think and got into the review number 4, was the beginning of, I did a kind of connected collection of stories about blue collar Hollywood, of which Dizzy Business is not a part. I wanted to write about kind of what I've observed in Hollywood, but I didn't want to write about the glamour part. I wanted to write about the people that I've met who work below the line, the people who are grips and camera operators and casting directors or casting assistants or writers assistants, and the lives that they lead. And especially because having been through the strike and been through the contraction of the business, I was really interested in the pressures that are put on those people and how no one really talks about them. And they're the people who do all the work. Um, so I've written a collection of these stories. They're kind of noirish, but um, coincidentally, when I started writing it, I was trying to think of two events that connect all the stories that were very LA. And one of them was a shooting at a club, which unfortunately happens not a lot, but it does happen. So a shooting, a kind of random shooting. And the second part was fires, because we have fire season and every year the city burns. And as I was finishing it, the Palisades and the city burned. So it was it's been a very weird experience because it kind of caught up with me. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with this collection now because I'm not really a short story writer. So uh, I'm going to try to submit it like as a book, but I don't know. So
Well,
that's that.
yeah, Daniel, I didn't know that this was based off a real instance. So that's interesting. I had no idea about that. I thought you just well, I mean, obviously that human trafficking and Mexican cartel stuff. I mean, obviously that we know that that is a thing. But yeah, I figured you kind of made this one up. So that's interesting.
Yeah, as I say, it was an article that just struck me because of how crazy it was. It wasn't linked up. I mean, it jumped. I've changed the characters a lot, but it jumped from character to character, and they all had these wild backstories that didn't seem to connect. And then there was also this fascinating thing about these casitas that are backroom gambling parlors where people are playing these weird video games that they buy credits to play. And I didn't know anything about that. And it's going on, I guess, all over the valley, the Inland Empire, in these back rooms, in bars, or just in a shop that has a little gambling parlor in the back.
I still don't know about that. So you got me.
I know it was weird. I had to do kind of deep dive into LA sort of seedy minor crime, middle class crime.
Yeah, totally. Interesting. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. Let's move on to Shane. So I want to preface this. Shane, you've got past lives in here, and um, this was an interesting one because whenever you put an issue together, uh, Jake and myself, we sit there and we talk stories and we pass them back and forth, and I pass a lot of the crime ones on and things like that. But there are some you read just right off that oh, okay, yeah, this is going to be going in. And what's interesting about this one is that as I was starting to put this together, I mean, as I was just starting to read the stories, just starting, I already had mine, right? I know that's going to go in. I already had the one from Michael Berry, the novella, that had been passed on from Hard Case Crime. And I already had the one from Jack, the Eddie Miles Drives Again. He had been on the podcast, and he had also was a recommendation from Charles Ardai over at Hardcase. And I know that Nobody's Angel is a really excellent kind of cabby pulp novel, if there's such a thing. And so, but my point is, just going into the submissions, I knew I already had three, right? And then two of the first three stories I read, no bullshit. Two of the first three stories I read were Past Lives by Shane and The Visitor by Michael Penkavage. Those were like literally like in the top three the first three submissions I got. And I read both of those, The Visitor and Past Lives, and I was like, oh geez, I got to take both of these. And before you know it, I got five stories and I've three submissions in out of like hundreds of submissions. So it creates a little bit of that's why I always recommend to people, there's no magic trick, or there's no, magic advice I can give you as to how to get in. But what I can tell you is it always helps to submit early, because those are the first things we look at. And we make selections as we go, because there's no way we can read all of the hundreds of stories and then look back and go, oh, okay, well, by the time you're on the 200th submission, you don't even remember the first one. So it's like you kind of got to go as you go. And so because of that, Shane's was chosen really quickly, and really liked it. Interesting. We've got snow, we've got Vegas, we've got a hitman, and we've got a kind of a time is a flat circle kind of concept at the same time. So, Shane, why don't you touch on that? Talk a little bit about past lives.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for the just the kind words. It's super interesting to hear about just the logistic psychology of stories you choose. I love it. If we have time later, I'd love to hear more about that perspective, because it's like, from my writer perspective, it's just like you write these stories, you pour, you bleed over them, you pour everything everything into them, right? And then you throw them out to the void, right? And some land, some don't, and you just never really know what's kind of happening behind the veil there. So that's super interesting to hear. But yeah, thanks so much for the kind words, and thanks for having me here today. I was saying earlier on, it's so awesome to see everyone's faces. I've been reading the magazine and really love like every single story, and it's like super different each one, but like of a piece, like they all fit in this magazine, if that makes sense. And then when I finished Past Lives, I mean, one of the first places I thought of was Starlite Pulp, just because it was just kind of a strange, for me at least, I don't know how it is to read it, but just like the story itself for me was kind of a strange mashup of different ideas and themes and kind of genre sensibilities, which is just kind of like where I'm pulled, like I really wish I just had, sometimes I wish I had just kind of a straight line, like I exist firmly in this genre, but I just kind of follow the energy where it goes. And sometimes that's kind of airy and philosophical. Other times it's just like grimy, nose in the streets, gun smoke, blood, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Past Lives, it's a story that ostensibly is a conversation between two people. There's an old man and a young man. The story begins with the old man arriving home on this night of kind of impossible snow in Las Vegas, which happens sometimes, but maybe not to this degree. It's kind of a once in a lifetime kind of event. He arrives home, clothes bloody. Quits his mysterious job over the phone, and then shortly thereafter finds this young man outside his house and brings him in from the cold, and they have a conversation that was really like the genesis of the story. And that's kind of I don't know, just kind of a setup that I've been interested in and fascinated by for a long time. And I've tried previous attempts at a story like this, sort of conversation between an old man and a young man, and all of the possibilities that just kind of inherently holds, right? Like you have I don't know, maybe regret and hard earned wisdom button up against like youthful idiocy, right? On the young part. And just as a conceit, that was just something I've been interested in for a long time. I don't know, maybe it starts from just reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy, a couple of his novels, and like Cities of the Plain, and even No Country for Old Men, end with these long philosophical conversations that just I love the kind of the ballsiness of that, being able to like kind of just we're going to sit in this space, almost like a one act play almost. But then in the writing of it, the story it took a kind of malevolent edge that I was kind of surprised by, and I just kind of I just leaned into, just allowed myself to lean into, despite kind of my first kind of intuitions around it. And I liked the idea that there was a kind of I don't know, like a foreboding, malevolent, maybe violent possibility from the old man or from the young man, or maybe from both of them. And leaning into that, I just further leaned into other kind of things I'm interested in beyond the crime and beyond the genre, the kind of the strict genre of that, supernatural and horror, and And then yeah, like you mentioned too, just like just in naturally kind of led to this space where there was it just led, so kind of flowed into this idea, this philosophical idea I've always been really fascinated by, Nietzschean eternal return. I think popularized uh, you know nowadays by True Detective, time is a flat circle, that idea that just like time is like on this sort of infinite loop and you're doomed to repeat your actions, and just the kind of the strangeness, I guess, of that as an idea, but also the horror of it, right? If you take it either literally or kind of metaphorically, right? Just in terms of the things that you have done that you can't forgive yourself for, or can't be forgiven for, right? And just that you're doomed to kind of cycle back to that again and again. And then you mentioned the setting too, Las Vegas. It's a setting that I'm from Las Vegas, where I spent kind of my formative years there. We moved there, was dragged there, kicking and screaming when I was 13 years old by my mom, and I left when I was 21. So long time ago now. But it's a place that's just kind of a core part of me, and just how I grew up and just where my sensibilities lie. And it's been a long time not really, I don't know, writing about other things than Las Vegas. And it's been, I guess, a long time since I've been there. And, almost like Daniel was mentioning with like stories, I wrote spent many years of my life writing a novel that came out last year, Bondage. And in the aftermath of that, I thought I was done with short fiction. I hadn't read short fiction in many, many years. And then just these kind of images and these scenarios and these characters started coming to me. And it seemed natural for them to live in like that short fiction space. And Las Vegas as a setting, a place that I had tried to kind of leave in my rear view and write about other places. Let's write about New York. Let's write about Europe. Let's write about, all these other kind of settings. Just kept coming back to Vegas as a place and as an idea and as a place where lots of kind of wayward people, at least in my experience of it, right? Just wayward people that are kind of thrown about by, just life storms and arrive to from different parts of the country. They move to the city for some kind of, I don't know, incremental bettering of their lives. So just as a place, it figures a bit into this story, but there's a collection of 10 or so stories that I've finalized and wrapped up and kind of considering a home for, that all kind of take place within that general setting, Las Vegas, Nevada, and use it as kind of a backdrop to just, I don't know, just the events, the obsessions, the violence, the trauma, right, of these different stories.
Excellent. That's interesting. So yeah, okay. I was actually at some point I was going to ask you about why the Vegas setting, because I know at this point you're up in Canada, right? So I was going to ask you a little bit about that, but obviously you just answered that. I definitely see the connection, I guess, if you want to call it that, with some of the McCarthy stuff in there in terms of the philosophical aspect and the younger versus older. Have you read The Sunset Limited?
I haven't, that's actually, no, that's interesting. I haven't read that one, but that's a total, like, I know a little bit about it, or just I've read synopsis of it. And so that
Right.
seems a total interesting touchstone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, funny. It's it's a play by McCarthy, and literally, it's also I think it's a film. I'm not sure. Yeah, no, I guess it's a film. I don't think it was ever in theaters, but it's a film with Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson, and it is literally from start to finish just a conversation. I mean, it's just back and forth, just talking. Um, and yeah, it's really interesting. In that particular case, it's not an old guy, young guy. It's two old guys, one black, one white, and they're talking kind of about the suicide and the absence of God versus believing in God. And it's a really interesting read. Anyway, yeah, that's I like that. And I didn't realize you were from Vegas, so that's interesting. I certainly understand going there kicking and screaming when you were 13. Um,
Yeah, no, totally. And it's one of those places, I don't know. I begrudgingly came to, I guess accept why I was dragged there when I was 13 years old, and the allure of it to people beyond like the normal kind of allure that folks have when they go there for like I don't know, a blurry weekend or something.
Right.
I came to see it is a place where at least I left in 2000, I don't know, 3 or so it's been a long time, but it was a place that you would just maybe this is kind of anecdotal, my mom, people I knew in my life, right? But it's just like it's a place you end up where there are these kind of incremental little steps you can take, in your life, right? It's a place of opportunity, and so, but it becomes interesting in that way as a place where it's like people arrive there from all different environs, all different kind of backgrounds, and it is like this kind of unnatural megalopolis out in the desert, right? That shouldn't
Absolutely.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Good. Okay, let's move on to let's go to Brittany. Now, Brittany, you have inheritance in here, and I think we can safely say that inheritance is probably out of the 11 stories in here, inheritance is probably the only traditional horror in here. Mine would be kind of a Western horror, and I think Michael's would be more of like a historical horror or bootlegging horror, whatever you want to call it. But yours, I think, is a little bit more on the more traditional horror kind of scope. But I really, the thing that struck me when I read this and that I kept going back to it um, as I was reading through the submissions was I thought you did such a good job with writing the girls, the young girls. I just really like understood their perspective. In fact, I liked them a lot more than the mother in the story. And not in a, I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that I connected with them and what they were going through, right? In terms of the house and the grandma and everything that's going on. So talk to us a little bit about where that came from and about um anything you want to add in with regards to inheritance.
Thank you for having me. This is a great conversation. There were a few things that kind of came together for this short story. The first was a location. During COVID, my family found a place with an above ground pool that we could go and be isolated in. So that was the original, and it had this field. Originally, the story had something to do with the field. It didn't quite work, so it changed. And then the other thing is like, I think the really realistic horror of hoarding houses. I have a lot of friends whose aging parents, they're having to clean out their houses. Even just last night, I talked to a friend who was showing me boxes and boxes of fabric that his mother had. So I thought that was a really relatable place to start a tense situation that a lot of people I know are going through. And then the other thing is, my kids are 12 and 14 and we're really close. I volunteered at elementary school for years. I feel like really privileged to have this insight into that age right now. So I'm finding a lot of my short stories have a point of view from someone who's younger. Not only do I see my kids' friends and their dynamics, like I was really interested in the dynamic between the sister, being sort of a favored or not favored sister or not favored child and how that feels. And it also makes me able to remember being that age myself. So it just feels like right now taking advantage of having that window into that age. I'm fairly new at this. I mean, I was a freelance artist for years raising my kids. I only started taking writing seriously about a year and a half ago. So when this was one of the first stories where I learned editing, like that it's not precious, the first thing that I write, and that I can go back without breaking it and actually fix and revo. So this had been rejected a few times. And then I love listening to podcasts about old stories. I think I had heard this one maybe an encrypted or Strange Studies of Strange Stories, but there was this story called The Curfew by Lucy M. Boston. I have the book because I'm at the age where I can't remember the name of anything. And there was something about the structure of that story. It's about kids who go to an aunt's house and find this bell. But once I read that, I was able to sort of restructure the story a little bit in a way that I thought worked better. So all of those things kind of are what came together for this one.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I yeah, I first off, what you just said right there, I think is so important, and that's just not for you guys. It's for me. It's for ev anybody that's watching this too. Like you mentioned, stories are not breakable. You can
Right.
start one and then you can go back and change it 29 times. You can change the main character, you can change where it took place, you can change the language in it, you can change the time of it, you can do anything. And that's because not to, toot our own horn here, but it is kind of crazy that what we do is literally make something from nothing. So that nothing you can change at any time. You
Right.
none of it's all malleable. You can adjust it as you need. So I love that. I love that the fact that I love the fact, and correct me if I'm wrong in the timeline, but it sounded like you had the story rejected places and then made changes to it, which
Yeah. Yeah.
is
After
which
a
is
few rejections, I think I knew there was something not quite working, especially with the ending. So I just, especially after I think finding just a structure that helped me, I was able, I mean, when you're in a flow state and you write something, it does feel magic. Like it feels, I don't know, I feel so good after it. So I think for a while it took me time to realize that that thing is great, but it's the start,
absolutely,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah. No,
Because it's
absolutely. I
so
mean,
special at first, you know?
I mean, how many memes have you seen online and things about how, you're looking at you finish your first draft and you're euphoric, and then a week later you look at it and it's like, oh, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a part of writing. So you're constantly tweaking and going back and changing things. But yeah, that's that's a cool kind of genesis.
Yeah, and
That's
I feel like, when I've taken some classes just to, and I think editing is a thing that I've found people have a hard time teaching because it feels less teachable in some way. And I only recently, I think it was through Chill Subs, I found a lesson about editing as if you're the reader. And there was some language in that where I was like, okay, I can kind of like apply this more. And I think that's why I love short stories. I love reading them. I love writing them. I don't know if I'll ever write anything else because especially right now where I feel like I'm still learning, I have plenty of ideas. So each time I write one, I can learn something new, apply it, and then move on to the next one. So, which I like about this short form of writing.
Oh, without question. I mean, part of the reason we started Starlight, no joke at all. I mean, this was one of the pillars that we really foundationally wanted to build on was, um, first off, I had a short story collection, and I was finding, Daniel, how hard it is to get a collection of short stories published. And that was annoying to me because I had published all the stories, like the stories had all been published. I'm just looking to publish the collection at this point.
Yeah.
And I had already published a novel and I had already published books of poetry. And it's like, come on, it can't be this hard. But then the second thing was that I really wanted a place where short stories and novellas would be the priority, right? Like I have a novel out with Starlight that had already been published somewhere else, and we're putting out Daniel's book, which had already been published somewhere else, and that's a novel. But out of this is going to be our 10th book, those are two novels, right? The other eight are all short story collections or novella collections. And that's what I want to continue to make the priority because the big five will never do that.
Yeah.
They don't care about it because they don't sell enough. And so, and to me, like you mentioned, Brittany, short stories are like they're like my lifeblood. I love them. I mean, and I can tell you this, since you said you might never write anything else besides shorts, I can tell you this. And I know some of you here will feel my pain on this, but when you write a bad short story, it's like, so what? You
Yeah.
know, I like the situation, I like the character, didn't work out, whatever, you move on. You write a bad novel, it takes like 2 years of your life and it sucks. And I've done that. The first book I wrote, which has never seen the light of day, and it's really good that it didn't, right? But I mean, you know, I, as some of you guys have noted, I put my heart and soul into that thing, man. Like I did, you know, I tried so hard on that. And looking back, I tried way too hard on that. Like I tried to write the greatest book that's ever been written. And of course that's silly, you know. But it short story, there's a magic to short stories because if they're not great, so what? It's not a big deal. But when they are great, they're amazing, you
Yeah.
know? And part of the kind of the inspiration, I guess, for not only what we look for with Starlight, but also the inspiration behind the whole label is that is certainly I grew up reading Stephen King shorts. Like, I mean, anything from the 80s and 90s, Nightmares and Dreamscapes and different seasons and Night Shift and you know all that. I mean, I was just a junkie for Raymond Chandler novels and Stephen King shorts, right? But but more than that, it was also for me the Tales from the Crypt, Creep Show, Twilight Zone,
Oh, for sure.
and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I mean, those four shows, everything in those are all shorts. Those are all short stories. I mean, and so when you see things like we have in here, a lot of hybrids, it's because they remind me of the Twilight Zone. Or now, I guess it would be more like Black Mirror, right? But they don't fit a specific category, right? Like there's a lot of Twilight Zones that are kind of sci-fi, but they're kind of horror. But then sometimes they'll be westerns, but they're creepy, you know? And so I love those little things. And again, you as great as novels are, and you know, I mean, we all have our favorite novels out there, and they're fantastic. But as great as novels are, so many times it's the short form stuff that I really connect with for whatever reason. And so yeah, anyways, loved Inheritance and thank you for sending it on.
Thank you.
Well, of course. Let's go to Michael. Michael, you wrote Blackwell Crossing in here, and for lack of a better term, I'll call it bootlegger horror. Um, and so why don't you talk to us a little bit about where that came from? Obviously, you're in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, and this takes place in Texas. So yeah, you know how did that happen, and kind of where did this all come from?
Yes, gladly. So first of all, thanks again for having me, and of course, particularly for having the story in the review, which is really great. Particularly, and I will probably get into that a little bit. It was really difficult to find a home for that because, as you already noticed a couple of minutes back, like to classify it in a genre is not that easy. So yeah. Um, yeah, first of all, like the place, yeah, it's set in Texas, and like with most, it's set in the U.S. with almost most of the stories that I've written so far. And the thing is, I've never been to the U.S., so I'm making this up as I go along, which next to the fact that like English is like my second language, it's like of course setting me up for imposter syndrome like every other day. Like, what am I doing? I have no idea what I'm writing about, what I'm doing here. But I've gotten away with a lot so far, so I I keep pushing. So I don't know. Of course, like the US is very just from pop culture is very ingrained into everybody's mind, also outside of the US. Like and when you hear about where the inspirations come from, that's also like part of the reason. So thing is, I actually first thought about the story. I stumbled across call for submissions and like a different small press for stories that kind of mash up like organized crime, mafia stories with supernatural elements. And I read that. I thought that's a great idea. Like so many possibilities I'm on. So I'm going to try something here. I tried to do that less and less, like to look for calls for submissions and prompts, because I feel like it keeps me from writing the things that I actually want to write. But sometimes it turns out well. Like in this case, I think it did. And yeah, so I tried to come up with something. So I'm a very, very visual guy, very mood guy, and I don't know what the first seed was, but one inspiration was. I don't know if you guys know this Walter Hill, Bruce Willis film, Last Man Standing from the 90s. I think it was a remake of some Kurosawa movie. Was it Yojimbo? I'm not sure right now. I think it was Yojimbo.
Yeah, it's a remake of both Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars.
Right. Yeah, so which is like by no means like a great film, but I don't know, like I'm born in the 80s, and these 90s action movies that my dad used to allow me to watch like late at night when I was like a teenager, that they kind of they kind of stuck with you. And this was had like this great atmosphere and the setting, like this bootlegging gangs way out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, somewhere near the Mexican border. And also then these kind of 90s, almost like John Woo style action sensibilities. So this whole combination kind of stuck with me. So for the setting and for the feel, that was kind of an inspiration. And just also then on the other hand, I came to think of for some reason, when I had the setting, I came to think of There Will Be Blood, Paul Thomas Anderson film, just from the also like a piece of the mood board, if you will. And yeah, then I had kind of the setting and the time frame, and I needed to come up with a supernatural element. And I have no idea how that came to be. It just, I don't know, it just at some point it was just there, and I went with it. So yeah, long story short, I submitted this one. It was like these things often go. There's like this deadline, which is always a good thing because it lights a fire under my ass and you get things done. But it's still most of the time I like finish these like late at night, like on the day last day of the deadline, and I just get it in. But of course it's unpolished, and it was shortlisted if I remember correctly, but then it was rejected. So I took it. I worked a little bit more on it, and yeah. So I had basically the story about this crew of bootleggers who are on a run in the middle of Texas, and they are going to hand over their truck with the booze to like a different crew, and then yeah, instead of the other crew, they meet something else, and the shit hits the fan. And I realized when I was trying to submit this to other places, or try to think of other places to submit it to, that it really doesn't fit anywhere on the horror spectrum that people are interested right now. So if you look at all the horror magazines and stuff, it's like gothic horror that's not allowed to be like too violent. You have maybe dark fantasy stuff, all these things, or you go to completely to the other spectrum. You have like splatter punk or like extreme horror, which this isn't. Which this isn't also. Like it's violent, but it's not like completely fully out there. But on the other hand, it has these crime elements, and it's like plays out in the middle of daylight, so it's not really gothic. It's not really dark. So yeah, I struggled to find like a good place for it, and I. For some reason, at some point, the word pulp just popped up in my head, and I was looking at what kind of publications publish kind of pulpy stories, and I realized, yeah, this is it. Like this is definitely where this is, because if it's kind of weird and strange and a little bit fucked up and it doesn't really fit anywhere, it's probably like kind of pulp fiction. And I found Starlite, and I submitted, and I'm really glad it worked out. Also because I think it really fits in this context, but also it would fit like with any kind of other story, even though that's not horror. I mostly try to write like crime, noirish stories. I still think like within the Starlite Pulp reviews, it would sit well besides all the other stuff that I'm writing. So that's also kind of nice if that makes sense. Yeah, that's how the story came to be. What's also funny about that is, so I on Instagram we exchanged some quick words with Caleb on the story, and he was like, I was really surprised by these horror elements that suddenly came up, which was I found interesting because, like, for me, of course, it's like a horror story, or if I like market it, whatever, if I talk about it, for me, it's a horror story. But then I realized, like in the context of the review, where you have all kinds of stories, you don't really know what you get if you don't do any research beforehand or look into what kind of stories you have there. It can be like a straightforward crime story or not. So that's really a nice thing, and that also kind of happened when I read Shane's story, kind of similar, because it really starts out like a really like a yeah, it's like a typical, not typical in a bad way. Like it plays a little bit with these crime tropes. It starts like a really this dark kind of contract killer crime story, which is kind of really grounded in reality, but then goes off to a whole different place where you don't really expect it. Of course, I don't know, if you have a story like this in some typical crime collection, it would never it would never go the way that it goes where it goes. And this is yeah why I think the review, like, it's a really really nice place for stories like that, and really 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 happy that it worked out.
Well, yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, like I mentioned, one of the main influences for us is like, Twilight Zone and Black Mirror and stuff like that. So I love the sci-fi noir, creepy Western, all of the mashups. Now, the difficult part, what I found that I kind of is what it is, deal is that they find a great home here, right? And I love that. And I'm proud to be able to do that. They're very hard to win awards with because they want, when it says they want a Western story, they want a Western story. They don't want a Western with supernatural elements, or they don't want a Western with sci-fi elements, and sci-fi doesn't want a Western. Sci-fi wants sci-fi. So as I'm at the end of the year when I'm submitting to these things, and by the way, we actually got placed in three from last year, best of Americans, which is amazing, and I'm certainly not complaining about that. But my point is, the hybrids that I love so much, very difficult to place. They just are. But the I thought your comment about Last Man Standing was really interesting, because I hadn't thought about that, but I love that movie. And because everything in that movie, again, hybrid, right? Everything in that movie feels like a Western, but it's in the 1920s and they're all in suits and fedoras in this Western town in Texas, right? Because it's bootlegging. So yeah, Bruce Willis, Christopher Walken is in that. Yeah, that's a good one, Walter Hill. But yeah, very good, Michael. Well, thank you, and I'm glad it found a home here for sure.
Another thing I want to add, if I may, real quick, a quick shout out to it's a little funny. A quick shout out to Michael Bracken, who was, I guess, most of the people who are here probably know Michael Bracken. So he was the guy who gave me like the first published the very first story.
Oh, nice.
And he, like, of course, if you know the name, you know that he's not only like an editor, but also like a slightly prolific short story writer. So he has like written like 1 million short stories. And it's like also in all kinds of genres, and he's like published anywhere. So it kind of also, when I look for markets where to play stories, and I find like Michael's name popping up, oh yeah, that's a good sign. That's probably like a good market. That's a litmus test of if it's good enough for Michael, like it's good enough for me. And I saw that on the homepage that I think it was like in the first or second review where I had a story that was a good sign for me too.
Yeah, Michael's been in two so far, two
Oh yeah.
reviews. And yeah, so if anybody doesn't know about Michael here, first off, Michael is an editor and a very good one. He also helps writers. He edits things and things like that. But he also puts together the best American PI stories each year. And so here's the thing, and I'm just gonna whisper this to you because I find it hard to believe. But we all write stories. Okay. Maybe you've written 10, maybe you've written 25. Okay. Maybe you've written, if you're weird, maybe you've written 50. Okay. Michael Bracken has published, published 1,200 short stories. I mean, come on. Just
That's ridiculous.
what? So, I'm never going to write 1,200 short stories, and that's if I write forever. So, that's just, but yeah, Michael's been in a couple. He actually got put into he was in the very first one, and he got that story made the distinguished list of the Otto Penzler's best mystery and suspense or whatever it's called. So yeah, he's a wonderful writer. And speaking of that, Michael, one of my kind of idols in that sense, without question, is Joe Lansdale, right? We've had him on the show, and if you on the podcast, and he's a guy who I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I just watched The Thicket the other night, with Peter Dinklage, Juliette Lewis, uh, Ethan Hawke's son. I think his name's Levon. And it's on Prime. It's on Prime right now, and it comes with the regular thing. You don't have to pay for it, which is nice. It's called The Thicket, and it is really good, but it's a Western, kind of a dark Western, but it's a Western. But, then he has also written, I think it's called Cold in July with Don Johnson and Michael C. Hall, the guy who plays Dexter. And that is dark, really dark, like noirish crime. My point is that the guy writes everything. I mean, he does horror, he does crime, he's funny. And so that kind of thing it's so interesting when you're able to be so flexible like that. Like there's so many writers out there who only do one thing, and they might do it really well, don't get me wrong, but they only do one thing. Like, they write crime. That's all. And the fact that, some of these folks can go out there and do all sorts of stuff is a lot of fun. So you're certainly on the right path there. Let's go to Lucas, and Lucas, you wrote the Ogres of Calico in here, and the Ogres of Calico, I think, even though my story is kind of a Western horror, I think yours is probably considered more of a traditional Western, although it still has certainly a twist to it. And one of the things we try to do in here, and I think I might have written this in the liner notes. I forget. Maybe I said it. I don't know. But one of the things we try to do with Westerns is I love Westerns. I grew up on Westerns. I have family that worked on Westerns, and they acted in Westerns and all that kind of stuff. Westerns have been a part of my life forever. And I love Westerns, and I find them very strangely, totally underappreciated in the literary marketplace, and I don't understand why. Larry McMurtry is one of our American treasures, as far as I'm concerned, and and then you've got guys like Zane Grey and Louis L'Amour and people like that really really kind of sold more books than the Bible for a long time in the U.S. And it pisses me off nowadays, because if it's good as a Western, people go, "Oh, it's not a Western, it's literature," right? Like Cormac McCarthy, no, 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 he's not a Western writer. He's literary. No, shut the that I hate that stuff. Like it's a Western, right? Blood Meridian is a Western. All the Pretty Horses is a Western. Like, don't Cities of the Plain is a Western. Don't classify it otherwise. It's silly. And so this is probably the most traditional of those. And what I tend to look for is I tend to look for Westerns and one of the things I've said before on them is I pick Westerns where you haven't seen the movie, right? Because there have been about 10,000 Western movies made, and we've all seen a ton of them, and they can be tended to be for a long time, particularly in the 40s to the 60s, they tended to be very along one kind of path, right? Like there's a town tamer, or there's a guy that comes in, and then there's the bad group of cowboys, and they come in. And I try not to publish those, not because it's not interesting, just because we've all seen that so many times before, right? And so one of the things I liked about the Ogres of Calico is that you had this story, and literally, if you read the first 3 pages and you stop there, it does seem like it's going to be one of those Westerns, right?
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden it changes. And all of a sudden we have, it brings in kind of ideas of kind of, capitalism and taking people's land and what that does to people and families. And so I really liked kind of that progression. So anyways, talk to us a little bit about the Ogres of Calico.
So I growing up, actually Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes was a big influence, and I don't know if that ever shows really in the story, but mystery has been really what I enjoy. But I had written this character of John Lamb, this really misanthropic, he doesn't like people. Some of that shows in this story, but I'd written about 2 novels on the character, and I wanted to do like a Sherlock Holmes meets the Wild West type of genre. And if you ever, like you were talking about, if you ever try to submit a mystery story that's set in the West, not a lot of people like it. So that's what I was kind of trying to do. And the other influence is James Elroy, in that the writer of LA Confidential and Black Dahlia, that to use a lot of real places and real characters. The town of Calico is a real place in California. It's a ghost town now. And so I wanted to set it there. And then, kind of going into the history of the town, the actual founder of the town, John C. King, is a real person. So, but like James Elroy does, he takes a real person and gives them a background that's fictional. So sometimes you take somebody that may have actually been a good person, you make them really bad. I hope that's not really my intention, but that's kind of how it came out. But yeah, so to set that. Oh, and that's what I was going to say. When I actually sent this to a beta reader, that's one of their criticisms is, why is the main character named John and the founder of the town named John? And it's like, well, because I'd written the character before, and the actual founder of Calico was named John too. So it wasn't intentional, but that's just how it happened. But no, I also wanted to do, this is one of the few stories I wrote where I didn't, most of the time when you write a story, you're looking to submit it to any magazine that'll take it. This time I actually submitted it with this magazine in mind, just because it's that you got Ogres in the West. It's pulp. It's really pulpy compared to I was originally going to type, when I envisioned it, it was going to be Ghosts of Calico, but I think that's been done before. So that kind of style, Ghosts in the West. So I really wanted to try something different, and that's why I changed it to Ogres.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Yeah, and that's interesting. I didn't I knew Calico existed, obviously, and I knew it was a ghost town, but I didn't realize that it was based on the actual town founder. So that's yeah, that's cool. That's cool. How much research did you do for it, or was it more of a cursory kind of thing, and you just figured you could use that?
Not much. It was mainly, I looked up who founded the town, the mine that he founded, and the stuff with the Silver Purchase Act that affected the town of Calico. But there wasn't much going. It was all what I devised myself. So,
Okay, excellent. Well, very cool, man. Well,
yep.
we have a huge like I mentioned before, I love Westerns. And so I'm always looking for Westerns. And uh, you know, we don't we get probably out of everything that we get submitted to the review on the regular, we probably get at least 50% of just straight up crime fiction.
Mhm.
So all of the other categories are 10 to 15% kind of thing. And yet, as you guys know, and as I've made clear here, I love those other categories, and I love it when those categories merge. So submitting, I think probably the hardest thing to find a home with the review is just a straight up crime story. Like, because I get so many of them, and quite frankly, even when they're really well written, they tend to follow, like you mentioned earlier, or somebody mentioned here earlier, there are certain tropes that get followed, particularly with crime fiction, that really make them somewhat predictable a lot of the time. And so I try to avoid that. So it's really kind of difficult to get crime, straight up crime, in here. And yet at the same time, like you mentioned, there is a detective kind of aspect to the Ogres of Calico, and I can sit after you mentioned it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see, I can see that the Holmes kind of influence from the essentially the deduction, right, um, of of the main character. So yeah, that's cool. That's one of the reasons why I love these too, is I love talking to you guys because I read the stories and I get my own feelings about them, but then you guys talk to me about him, and all of a sudden I get a different perspective on it. So that's cool. That's cool. Well, thank you, man. I'm glad it found a home here. I like that one quite a bit. And then last let's go to let's go to Caleb. So Caleb wrote Giant Steps, and um I had two thoughts immediately when I looked at Giant Steps. Number one was I love boxing stories because I grew up in a household where boxing was a big thing for my family when I was young. We have a lot of athletes in the family. I was an athlete when I was young, and but for my grandpa, boxing was like the thing. Like no lie, but grandpa would come over to the house, and when a boxing match was on, you had to bend under the TV. You could not walk in front of the TV. You had to get down, right? And so and so boxing was always a big thing. So I thought, oh, okay, boxing pulp, that's super cool. And there's actually quite a history of boxing pulp in the past, and I'm talking 30s to 50s kind of thing. Um, so I thought, oh, okay, this would be fun. And then the second thing I thought, and I'm just being honest, okay, um, I it changed after I read it, but I thought, boy, that's kind of pretentious. Putting putting the whole Giant Steps album and telling me to listen to the songs as I go along, and and so but what's funny is I read through the story a couple times, and weirdly, um, six reviews. So how many stories that is? And before review six, we had gotten one boxing pulp story in 5 issues. And in this one, we got three. So, right. So, you never know. I'm a huge jazz fan. I grew up with jazz. My mom worked for the California Jazz Foundation. She worked with Kenny Burrell at the UCLA Jazz Department. And my dad was a big jazzophile. So, I mean, I very familiar with jazz and especially a lot of the larger artists. And so Giant Steps based on the Coltrane album, and yet boxing, those things don't seem to really sync. So talk to us a little bit about where that came from and how how it came together.
Well, I appreciate you including Giant Steps on the in the review. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, no
Sometimes
problem.
my mixer doesn't like Zoom for some reason. Yeah, I appreciate you having me in the review. Shout out to David Scott. Hey, he actually recommended I write something for you guys. He was in Pulp Review 5, and I wasn't planning on writing anything, but I picked up the issue number 5 and read it, and it was so good. Um, that was probably one of the first anthologies of anything I've read in recent years where I didn't skip any stories, nothing was dull. So I right then and there I was like, I have to write something for this. And how you mentioned about 50% crime stories coming in, I specifically wrote a boxing story because it's like they can't get that many. There's no way. So I figured if I could get a unique story that isn't being written about too often, I might have a good chance of getting in. And Giant Steps really came about because one, I was also a big fan of like the classic fight stories from the 20s and 30s. Just last year, I read Robert E. Howard, Steve Costigan, Sailor Steve Costigan stories, and those are very formulaic plots, but the action was always great. So you get a lot of heart punches and the back and forth, and then the guy's going down, but then he makes the comeback. So I wanted to write something to kind of as an homage to that. But I'm also a big fan of the Harlem Renaissance writers, and specifically Langston Hughes. And his poetry often has a rhythm inspired by jazz and blues at the time. And I'm a big jazz fan to begin with, thus John Coltrane's Giant Steps. So I was really interested in the idea of writing a story that utilizes the rhythm of not just boxing, because it's a very rhythmic sport, um, but also how I can incorporate jazz into it. And I wrote the story first. I wanted, it's funny, the plot and everything actually kind of came second. I mainly wanted to get the fight aspects out. I actually read Shane sent me his Ultimate Warrior story he wrote, which is a boxing tale, and that's more of a character based tale. Mine is more of a action oriented story with some flashbacks. So I wanted to go into it with the action as the focus, but done in a way where it kind of excites the readers. And the idea of actually incorporating, like he said, pretentious, of the whole album as the title for each scene, I really didn't know if that was going to work. I wrote out the scenes first, and then I went back and I shaped them to fit uh, the rhythm of the songs and the vibe I was going for. I don't know if I necessarily succeeded in that endeavor, but like for instance, the one scene, my protagonist Kowalski gets knocked out, and this next scene opens up with John Coltrane spirals, and that gives you the feeling of kind of spiraling out of control, and that goes right into a flashback scene. So you kind of get a feel for why his life is where it is now, and then as the beat kind of picks up, he gets up off the canvas, and the fight continues. Um, a easier one to understand was the song Countdown. I have that as the introduction to the fight. And this is where reading ability and the speed at which people read comes into effect. Because for me, when I did that, the beginning of that song, it almost has a countdown aspect, and you're doing the introductions, and then it goes real high pace, which would go right into the fight. But if you're a slower reader, you probably don't get through the whole countdown and it gets to the high space. So it might not work in that regard, but I still thought it was a fun idea to try. I also appreciate you guys having a higher word count. This was actually one of the shorter stories I've written, so I didn't have a problem. I think it was only like 5,000-6,000 words, but a lot of times I can't submit my stories places because they go over that 10,000 words. And publishers hate that for some reason. I don't know why they don't want longer short fiction anymore. I was always a big fan, like you said, of Stephen King short stories. They're longer, sometimes novella length. And that's why I was really excited when you had a novella in this issue. It's like, that's cool because it separates not just the story, but it kind of splits up. So you don't have the 5,000 word story, 5,000 word story. It gets monotonous. Um, so yeah, that was a lot of fun though, to write the story and just being able to incorporate the jazz. And as far as like the action stuff and how the fight scenes unfold, because I recently did an interview with a different publication, and they were asking me how I go about writing my scenes, and if it's more like movies, like if I write it like a film scene, and I don't generally, but this one I actually it sort of went into it like that. I'm a big fan of the anime Hajime no Ippo, which is like a late 80s, early 90s boxing anime. And some of my scenes play like how I envisioned those scenes would play without the dramatic pauses and, guy gets knocked down and it takes 5 minutes for a 10 count. But I was able to kind of get that back and forth. And anime uses a lot of music. So you can get again, elicit the emotion that you want from the reader, which I thought was very important. And the only other real influence I probably had for this story was Norman Mailer's The Fight, which was the his coverage of the George Foreman Muhammad Ali fight, which was an excellent book. And just the way I thought about maybe steering it towards like having announcers doing a play-by-play of the action, but I like the idea of actually having the reader closer to the fight by just showing the action third person. But yeah, it was a blast to write. And a fun fact is I specifically wrote this story for Starlite Pulp. So if you guys didn't like it, it was going right in the garbage. Like, I don't know who else would want to a jazz themed boxing story, but I did not expect I was gonna be competing against two other boxing stories. I thought no one was writing boxing because I was looking up dead genres and boxing. I forget the name of it, but like the old World War II fighter pilots, like
Hmm.
that genre of fiction, aviation fiction,
Yeah.
and strangely enough, plantation fiction was something that was done once. So that's probably better off dead. But yeah, that was those are the main ones though, was the aviation and the boxing that I felt I would like to see a resurgence of. So if I was able to do any kind of justice to having a pulp boxing story, I'm happy that I can, do it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. And it's funny because I was just mentioning boxing and I kind of forgot. I know it sounds weird, but I did. I just kind of forgot that my story in the fourth review, the Sonny Haynes story, is the Sweet Science Blues is a boxing story as well. But it's a the boxing is only about the first 3 pages of the story, and then it turns into the fix that was in based on the match and then kind of the aftermath of that and fixing it, quite frankly. Um, so, but yeah, there were 3 boxing stories in this issue, which is just bizarre. And one of the other ones was actually quite good. So this was and one okay. So one of the things, right? You When I put these things together, Jake reads every single crime story, pretty much. Well, he reads every single crime story that I pass on to him. So it's not everyone. Some I read and go, okay, and move on to the next one. But my point is, any that pass that first round, Jake reads. But a lot of the ones that are in the tiny little subgenres, like boxing or like, Charles Ardai had kind of a backstage theater pulp in the last one, and there's Kearney pulp and stuff like that. Those little things they don't really get passed on. I read them and I kind of decide on that. And so this these were a lot of fun. It was fun seeing boxing stuff come in. Um and there's so much interesting context in the sweet science, the pugilistic arts, in particular the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And I know it goes on now too, but the amount of corruption that was involved in that is just profound. And so you're constantly dealing with not just the boxing because there's so much else going on around it, right? And so it's a fun subgenre to look into. You mentioned Robert E. Howard, and Robert E. Howard, I just read sorry, listened to. I just listened to a very large audiobook of his. And I believe it was the best horror stories of Robert E. Howard. So there was no boxing in there, but he really did write action well. He really did. He
Oh,
died
for
in his
sure.
30s, by the way.
Mm. Yeah, he which I think he was also a boxer, or at least practiced boxing. Um, but I read most of his collections. He has Celtic stories, your
Mhm.
horror stories, obviously your Conan Sword and Sorcery is the big he's inspired a lot of my writing, but not necessarily the style,
Yeah,
but just like the general themes and whatnot.
yeah,
Also Charles Ardai's story was what gave me the idea for having the age, not that it's an original theme, but the aged out fighter,
yeah,
because his story dealt with the performer that was, quote unquote past his prime, but I really like the idea of the guy getting his one last comeback.
for
Um,
sure.
yeah, so that was a lot of fun. But um,
One thing I will throw out there, by the way, with Robert E. Howard is from a writing perspective, as a writer, they're fun to listen to, and you get to see what he does well. And some things that are just very antiquated, very dated, right? They're also incredibly racist.
oh
So
yeah, definitely.
so it's that part of it is kind of hard sometimes too. Everything that has to do with there's so much the savages, the this untamed savages are just everywhere and all over the place. And weirdly, even sometimes you can tell that Howard has a very kind of empathetic take on that, but the language is still what it
Yeah,
is,
it's
you know?
harsh. Well,
Yeah.
his I think it was his Bran Morn, if that's if I remember correctly. I think those were his Celtic stories. They were called the Picts, I think. They were like a race of pre-Celtic warriors or something. But those got very kind of racist. It was very uh race related, the
Yeah.
stories and the
Yeah.
themes, but they weren't necessarily racist because they weren't like real people generally. But the Steve Costigan stories for sure. He's going into all kinds of harbors in Hong Kong, and just the like the Oriental like language they use was it doesn't age well at all.
Right. That's what I mean. And so my point is, for those of you, anybody that watches this, if you Robert E. Howard is a wonderful foundational sci-fi and horror writer, but and fantasy too. But you know, take it, yeah, grain of salt. Right? Because it's a doesn't age particularly well, some of it. So yeah. Okay, so let me talk briefly about mine. I wrote, geez, I got to look it up. I wrote Swallow Time to Pay in here. And it's the third, I think, third or fourth Rye Lonehand story that I've written. And I have a lot of fun with him. This weird, you know, half Pawnee, half Irish kind of guy that doesn't really fit anywhere. He doesn't fit it with the white culture of the time. And he's, you know, not an outcast from the native tribes, but you know, doesn't wasn't really raised there either, and so but he looks more native, and so uh it's he's an absolute blast to write. And weirdly, when I started these, I did not realize, I had no idea they were going to take this weird horror supernatural aspect in them at all. The first one I wrote was called The Ghost of All Goodbyes, and um it's pretty much just like a straight up Western. And then weirdly, everyone since then, they just get weirder. And I'm not quite sure why, but I'm kind of digging it. It's like I'm using him as kind of this kind of conduit to just kind of get into weird spaces. And I had okay, so you talk about influences, right? And we're talking about Howard. I recently listened to the Howard collection, and the Howard collection had a lot of Howard was close with Lovecraft, and the Howard collection had a lot of Lovecraftian-esque kind of stories and mentions in there. And then I had also just recently finished the book Angel's Inferno, which is the follow-up to Falling Angel, which was Angel Heart, the movie with Mickey Rourke and Lisa Bonet and Robert De Niro. And as weird as Angel Heart is, for those people who have read it, Angel's Inferno is way weirder and has a bunch of like Black Sabbath and orgy kind of scenes in it. And so between the Lovecraftian aspect and what I had just read in that, I just figured, you know what? Let's just kind of have some fun here with this one. And and so, yeah, Rye got into a really weird place, and I had no idea. That last scene, I had no idea what was going to happen there. I was just as surprised as you guys when you were reading it. I was just like, I was just like, okay, you know, and I knocked it out in I think one session, and then I went back and read it once or twice, and I was like, all right, it's weird, but you know, we'll go with it. And and so yeah, you know, like I mentioned before, I really love Westerns. I love traditional Westerns. I love controversial Westerns. I love all types of Westerns. And and I love hybrid. So I just use Rye as kind of this character that gets into really weird situations. And this whole thing with the mark, I love that. I when I first did it, I didn't even realize it would ever really play into anything further down the road, you know? And then I'm like, hey, let's just use it as we move forward. Let's see what it means. I don't know what it means, so let's go. And so yeah, it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's I write the Sonny Haynes books. I'm actually Daniel, by the way, I'm more than 160 pages in at this point. I'm probably a month from finishing it. So that'll be the third Sonny book, which I'm stoked about. That'll be out next spring, I think. But and that's my kind of crime fiction guy. But yeah, with Westerns, it's it's just kind of like let's make them weird. So and you know what? I think I've said this before on another podcast somewhere, but part of it is I think the West was weird. Like you're asking these people, first off, let's not even get into the indigenous tribes. I mean, obviously what they had to go through, right? And try to survive and deal with wave after wave after wave of these people coming. But then the people that went west ended up being so damaged and so traumatized. And, women were going crazy. Men would leave and they'd be back in a week or they'd be back in 2 months or they wouldn't be back at all. And you had this area to protect and, but the land was, not really yours anyway. And then the whole situation is just it's so ripe for so much drama because it was such a weird time, and yes, it's very, very American and all of that, of course, but it's also just it's this almost kind of unique landscape. And so writing about it is and that's part of the reason why, by the way, I just want to point this out. That's part of the reason why I try not to do traditional Westerns, because the traditional Westerns of the white guy comes into town and saves everybody has been done so many times. And some of them are very well done. And I'm a huge fan of a bunch of the John Wayne films and Robert Mitchum and all that kind of stuff. It's not that. It's just there's so much more. There's so much ripe material there, right? And to keep telling the same story just seems dumb to me, right? It's also not necessarily historically accurate, but it just seems silly to me. So that's why I just think the Westerns are this amazing time to kind of peel back, if you will, So anyways, that's kind of a little bit about that. So let's open it up to anybody here who you can ask any of the other writers questions. You can ask me questions if you want to know stuff about Starlite, or the review. So at this point, we'll open it up. And does anybody have any questions for either each other or myself?
Michael,
I would like to. Sorry, you go ahead.
I have a question for you because I'm curious how you approach writing in a second language. Do you think in German and then translate it, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, very good question. So it's a struggle sometimes. So when I was very young and I tried to write, like probably maybe not everyone, probably most of the people here, maybe you guys dreamed about writing from an early age, or you also tried writing at a very early age. So of course I started writing in German. Like when I was a kid, I was a big fantasy guy. So of course I tried to write my big epic fantasy story, which I guess I think I managed to write 30 pages or something. And I dabbled a little bit more in short stories in German. It was all fine, but I wasn't really serious about it. But what I also did is I started reading in English in a very early age. So like with 16, 15, I started reading books in English, and I never looked back. So first I wanted to read everything like not in a translation, but the things that I loved reading in their original language. And then I stuck with it. And at some point when I really many years later, I think it was 2017 or something, when I wanted to write again, I just sat down and what actually, like, there was the G20 summit in Hamburg in Germany, where there was this clash between like the police and left wing and these left wing forces, and it kind of made me so angry that I sat down and like wrote a very quick story about it. And I thought about just try and write in English, and that just from the very first go, it turned out very well, and I thought it turned out better than what I've written before in German, and it just really made me realize one thing that everybody here knows, that the best thing to do to learn writing is reading. It's like the one thing you have to do to be a writer. So I realized that I'd like ingested so much from the books that I've been reading that it actually worked better for me to write in English than in German. But of course, I still struggle from time to time with grammar and stuff, and get like I said, like imposter syndrome. Like, can I really do that? But yeah, I get through it most of the time. And to your question, how do I think? I can't really honestly tell you. Like, probably in English most of the time, because I mean, also for us here, like depending on the job you do, like most of my life, at least in part when I was like, I used to be a chemist. I studied chemistry, and of course also like in sciences, everything you consume is English basically. And also at some point on the entertainment front, I watched movies exclusively in English or in the original language, whatever that may be, but mostly that's English. So yeah, I think outside of my of my day-to-day like private life, I think everything happens around me happens in English. So it's feels somewhat natural, but of course it's still like a second language. So it's not you're never still not perfect, of course.
Yeah, you
That's
definitely pull it
fascinating.
off.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But I don't know about you guys, but my second language is Spanish, and trust me, nobody wants to read my story I write in Spanish. So
There's a rhythm. I think there's a rhythm to languages, though, and I studied German a little bit, and there's a I can see how you could, as you learned English, you would learn the music of English, and then it just flows. Because that was the only way I could get German, was when I finally got the rhythm of it, as opposed to, because the grammar just threw me, and the sentence construction is so upside down. But there's a kind of, and they're similar. The English and German are similar in that way. They're consonants and a lot of hard sounds. Yeah, I think I'm so impressed that you can do that.
Well, thank you. I think I think there are also big differences in the two languages, as the German grammar is very limiting, oftentimes very very strict, whereas English, by comparison, is a lot more free. You get away with more stuff. You can bend it more to your will, if you will, than German. And also like the things I really like to read, especially like in crime fiction, people like James Ellroy, James Lee Burke. Like I really like these people who just have this amazing prose and these amazing stylists. And I realized soon that it doesn't translate at all. So if you really want to experience that, you have to read it in English. And I always wanted to, like, if it's just like a percentage, I always wanted to do something like that, to write in this kind of almost poetic style, which just doesn't work as well in German. It just doesn't. This particular style, it only works like in English. I think this certain flow that you can get into the language, and yeah, that's why at some point the decision was very easy to just screw it. I just go ahead and try to do my best, and of course I think it's like it's a like the whole thing, the whole me being an author. It's obviously for everybody like a work in progress, but for me particularly, of course, it's still limiting in a way, because like if you're not growing up speaking this language, I don't have this kind of range in terms of the sheer vocabulary to draw from. But yeah, I try.
yeah, one of the things I heard a while back that I thought was really interesting was, and it was from a Spanish speaking author, and it wasn't Marquez. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was one of the like really big names, but he said that he writes and reads in English, even though the majority of his speech is in Spanish, because of the allowance in the English language of the amount of qualifiers you can use and passive voice, where you can make sentences so much different than you can in a more strict kind of grammar-filled language. And so so my point is that's not the first time I've heard that, but it's fascinating because again, that's it's part of what makes the English language so interesting to read and write, but it's also part of what makes English so difficult to learn
Yeah.
because there are so many of those. Yeah, this is a rule, but not really here. So anybody else? Questions?
Just kind of a question, or I don't know how to really to phrase this for just kind of for a number of folks on the podcast here, but just I was like pleasantly surprised to see how horror threaded through, not every story, but a lot of these stories, but in very like kind of different ways, and the ways in which like horror mashed up with genre, like Brian Lucas, like for you two, it's like with Western, and then Michael, like with the historical kind of crime fiction, and then Brittany, you with like a kind of, I don't know, more domestic like character study that kind of transmogrifies into the space. It's I don't know. I was reflecting on just like the ways in which it was different in each story, and how for certain pieces, like Brian, for yours, it almost reminded me of like From Dusk Till Dawn, right? Which is like it's one firm genre, and then there's a switch, and it becomes something totally different, right? Whereas like Michael's, like with your piece, it seemed to be like almost like it was, you were true to each genre throughout, and it was really interesting the ways those kind of interweaved. Like the horror comes up, and then but it's not like we've forgotten the crime genre, and the double cross, and and who's kind of screwing who, and just kind of the mechanics of that, like on that kind of crime level. So I don't know, I'm just kind of just throw it out to like all of you who kind of indulge in that space, like how you approach it. Like Brian, you were talking about how it just kind of came about organically. I don't know if if you just have different perspectives on like the ways in which you can kind of mash those things up, or if you just kind of follow your energy and kind of where the story leads you, that's where it leads you. I don't know.
Who wants to tackle that?
I mean, I think for me, when I started deciding that I was going to devote my time to writing, I mean, it felt like such a gated community that I had to kind of I was just like, if I can write Tales from the Crypt for my like type of stories, and just like keep it very like, what are things I enjoy reading and what do I want to do with it, and make it feel like less intimidating, I guess. So I've always loved horror. I love horror movies. I love horror short stories. I love, what's interesting is as I'm starting to write more and more, I'm actually struggling with kind of the two sides of a plot-based story and a character-based story. And sometimes this was one where I think they both came together in a way that was really satisfying to me. But, I just finished one that I was really using kind of as a punching bag to learn editing. That's very tropey, and it's kind of what like, it's a Western vampire thing, which I like a lot, but it didn't have the same, I wasn't as emotionally invested in it because I think it lacked the characters of some of other stories. So I'm kind of, funnily enough, struggling to do a lot more of the horror stuff because some of my stories are more interested in what happens to people. But when they come together, I get very excited because those are like the stories I like to read. I really like Karen Russell and Brian Evanson, all I think bring a lot of like, it's not necessarily two different genres, but it's like an interest in people mixed with an interest in plot together. And I find it sometimes hard to match those two. So I want to do horror more often than I actually am able to make it work because it's like my favorite genre.
I, I would piggyback on that and saying that for me, you know, I started out writing, well, I started out writing poetry, but then when I was writing fiction, I started out with crime. And that's because a lot of what I had read and really enjoyed was crime. And the other thing was horror. And I didn't write much horror because in my head, I thought, and I don't know why, but I thought crime I can make work. Like when I read Chandler or I read Thompson, I feel like weirdly, and I'm sure I don't do it as well, but I feel like I look at it and go, I can do that, right? Um, Whereas with a guy like King or Peter Straub or, I read a lot of Dean Koontz too back when I was a teenager. Um, I look at that and I go, can I make the reader make that leap, right? Because it's a leap. Making something scary is hard in literature. And so if I think about it like that, horror is really intimidating to try to write. However, if you just think about it from the perspective that there's a lot of life that is fucking horrific, and just putting a lens to that, it changes it. So my point is, if you look at it like some of the Stephen King stuff I've read, and quite frankly, I love King. I love King. I've probably literally read 90% of the guy's catalog, which is just insane. But I'll be the first to say, I wouldn't say it to him, but I'd be the first to say there are some stories that they don't quite work for me. Just like I was talking about, I'm not able to make that leap, right? It seems a little silly. It seems a little, it's an affectation or it seems a little artificial or whatever. But when you, but the flip side is when you write about terrifying or horrible things that happen to people that are not that outlandish, that's also horror. That's the thing. And so if you can focus on it and just look at it from the perspective of I'm not going to try to make people make a huge leap here. I'm just going to try to convey the horror of the situation. Then I think the aim of the writing changes a little bit, right? And then all of a sudden if and it becomes believable because the writer believes in it as well and is just trying to chronicle it, if that makes sense.
And maybe to pick up on that from my perspective, I think I come from the same place. So I also started with the crime story basically, and try to, because of that prompt that I read, try to give it like an horror edge, and try to think about how to do that just to make it fun. I don't think my story is scary in any way, but it's like, it's in a pulpy sense, it's fun. And I also am quite happy with how it turned out, in a way that you don't actually really need the supernatural elements, because it really ends with a conflict between the human characters, if you will. That's where it ends up again, which was kind of nice. I don't think that was really planned, but what I tried to do is, and which is kind of like a pet peeve for me, which with short stories, there are a lot of short stories out there that don't really have like, if I read a story, I want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I want to have like a complete story. And a lot of stories out there, I think, even those that are really, really well written, they seem like they're extracted from some bigger piece, or they're just like, you look into a bigger story and it's just not really like a complete whole in itself. And I always try to do that before I start writing, to have really a complete story with a beginning and middle and an end. And in that case, that was just like the ending that I came up with. I want to be it like that you are satisfied in the end, that it's like you have closure and there's an end. And yeah, that's how that came to be.
Well, and one thing I want to jump on that he just said is that like he mentioned at the end of the story, horror aspects or not, it's about the human aspect of it. And if shows like, say, The Walking Dead, okay, I was a huge Walking Dead fan for about the first, I don't know, 3 seasons, and then I don't think I've watched one since. But regardless, what those shows show us again and again is the horror is scary, but it's really us that are the problem. Right? Like consistently, it's the human aspect that screws things up. It's the human aspect that takes up arms against itself, even when it shouldn't, even when there's this other existential terror involved because we can't get out of our own way. And that in its own way is that to me, in a lot of ways, that is the horror aspect. Does nobody wants to get caught by a zombie? Sure, I get that. But the things we do to ourselves are awful. And that to me, the aspect of the human condition, the fact that we're not learning from it is kind of the horrible part about it, right?
Well, who I think is very underrated horror writer that does that very well is Cormac McCarthy. Whether
Mhm.
it's The Road or Outer Dark, like his ability to show horror in these situations that it's just all man-made. There's no outside paranormal sources, or there's no monsters. The monsters are the people and what they do to each other and themselves.
Well, you could throw blood meridian into that too. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean that's it. I called it a Western earlier. You could very easily call that a horror book because the things that we do to each other so that they can get a little bit of money for scalping someone is dumbfounding, you know? So yeah, that makes total sense. You could throw what Child of God in there too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
When I think both those books, right? Like I think of Lucas's work, it's like they're it hangs off of the framework of a real life kind of event and characters, and I think they think the marauding crew in Blood Meridian was a real life,
Yeah.
kind
Oh
of
yeah.
rogue, right? Yeah, contingent that went into Mexico. So I would find that really fascinating too, like taking not necessarily like okay, I'm going to do years and years of research to like make things like historically accurate, like Hilary Mantel's, like British series, looks at just that stays true to like historical events, but to use that as a kind of a framework to kind of hang your hat on and kind of veer off into kind of other territory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody
Well, the
else?
most frightening thing about characters like Lester Ballard, going back to Child of God, are
Mhm.
that those are people that are among us that you don't even realize. Like there's so many Lester Ballards out there. That's what's really horrifying.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And again, that goes back to that, you know, the the whole zombie apocalypse thing that has been, in my opinion, at least, completely overdone now over the last decade and a half. But again, it shines the light back on us, you know? I mean, the zombies are scary. Like the zombies in 28 years later and stuff, they're terrifying. The zombies in World War Z, they're terrifying because they're fast. They're really fast. But the zombies in The Walking Dead, for example, are not particularly terrifying. They're slow and they don't think. It's the humans that are terrifying. And that is just this continuous kind of trope, right? Through all of this is yeah, the zombies are scary, but let's look at us here. And uh yeah, I mean it's while I think the zombie aspect of it is certainly overplayed at this point. Um, that particular aspect is never really overdone because until we learn from the damn thing, it's it is what it is. We can't say it enough, right? Until we figure it out. So, Daniel, have you ever looking back at your filmography, is that the right word there? Have you ever worked on a horror piece?
A lot of people thought Pacific Heights was a horror film.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, I did. Uh, it's not. I'm sort of with you on this, and I was thinking, you guys have articulated in a way that I hadn't thought about before, but really, um, I was talking to Walter Hill once about Alien and how it was written by another guy. It was written by this guy, Dan O'Bannon. And he basically came up with the idea of the spaceship and the alien and the thing coming out of somebody's chest. And Walter and his partner jumped on it and they rewrote it. And Walter, A, doesn't like sci-fi, and B, doesn't like horror. But what he did that he explained was so brilliant was he did just what you're talking about. He made it about the people on the ship. He made it this labor dispute, and he made it about the alien becomes the catalyst or the unstoppable force against which these people are revealed and their relationships are unraveled. And that I think what you're saying is that seems like the best way to do horror, which is where the Cormac McCarthy comes in. Almost anything could be a horror story if you frame it in the right way, and it will work because it's about the people reacting to the thing or releasing the thing, like in Brittany's story, where it's really about the anticipation of the thing that's coming at you, right?
Yeah.
I've worked. Yeah.
I
never thought of that before. I did a rewrite of The Eye, which was the Japanese horror film that they made. I forget who did it ultimately. And I never really thought of that. That probably would have helped me when I was working on it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I love that. And I think it's an interesting synchronous thing. I mean, to everyone's point, yeah, the thing that terrifies me most is what human hands are capable of doing, right? I mean, like someone like McCarthy is a master at displaying that, or like the illustration of the zombie movies they mentioned, Brian. But also, like the synchronous thing to me is like if you do have an element of horror, like half the people on this call and the works, I think what everyone does really well, I mean, at least for my sensibilities, like what scares me the most, like with the monster, or Daniel, to your point, but with the alien, right? And in Alien, it is the mystery, the inexplicableness of it, right? Like Alien does that super well, where it is what I imagine would be like if humans stumbled upon a crashed alien ship, right? It's all mystery. It doesn't make sense. Where does the alien end and the ship begin, even, right? It's just kind of all melded in. It's alien, right? It's completely foreign to where our minds are. And then every successive movie kind of lights up the edges more and more and more, right? And then the new ones go just deep into like the Christ parable and kind of making everything explicit, when it's just like the terrifyingness of it all is just like the unknowableness kind of it.
Yeah, well, I think also another movie that fits into this actually very closely is The Thing by John Carpenter, which was fairly terrifying. But again, that's an alien, and it's about the people's reaction to it. But again, the alien itself is so incredibly foreign. I mean, it's shape-shifting, and it's, got its own mental processes going on, and it mimics things, and that we just have such a hard time kind of wrapping our head around. But again, a lot of it is the human reaction to it.
And I would say Under the Skin is another one that has where the alien is so foreign to, especially in the film. The movie and the book are wildly different, but also.
Yeah, that's a good shout. It's kind of a hard movie to watch almost, because it feels like it keeps you at arm's length, because it is so close to that alien point of view.
Yeah, excellent.
I have a quick question. My cousin, I realize, has been in a couple of your reviews, Gabe Hart.
Yeah, Gabriel. Yeah.
And I was just curious, do you encourage like people that if you've been published once to keep submitting, or do you like people to give it a break to give other people a chance? Just from it.
That's a wonderful question, Brittany. That's a fair question, and I'm going to answer it as honestly as I possibly can. We have Daniel, you've been in this, I think, 3 times.
Yep.
Is that correct? Michael Bracken has been in it I think I said twice earlier. I actually think it's 3 times out of the 6. Um, Nolan Knight's been in it twice. So there are plenty of people and authors who have been in it more than once. Yes, I encourage people to submit more than once. However, I also want you to understand that um and I know, I mean, I know I'm an editor and I know I make these decisions and all that, but keep in mind I'm a writer too. And I for the longest time I submitted stories everywhere, and um you have to understand that just because you got in one time doesn't mean you're going to get in again. You know what I mean? I think a lot of writers kind of take it for granted, like, oh, I got in here before. And the way that these issues take shape is so incredibly kind of organic in a way that I can't tell you. There's usually somewhere between 5 and 10 stories per issue that I have to say no to that are really, really good stories that I would love to publish, but they just don't fit that issue. And that's why a lot of the times in the feedback, I'll say, liked the story and I like this about it, but it just doesn't fit for what we're doing here. And like a couple of you have commented on that, I try really hard with these to have them as seamlessly as possible go from genre to genre. And sometimes there will be a story that might be very well written and I might like it a lot, but I'm looking at the stories that are around it and it just doesn't fit in, It's just it it would stick out like a sore thumb, even if somebody finished it and went, "Oh, that was a good story too," but because it just doesn't go with kind of that. And it's not like we have an overarching theme or something for each issue. It's just as it kind of develops and takes shape, it kind of becomes its own animal, right? Its own organism. And so what I'm trying to do is, and I've mentioned this before, but what I try to do is almost put it together like an album, right? So somebody had mentioned earlier about how it jumps from genre to genre, and that's very much on purpose. I try not to put, like, Brittany story, I think you're what, number 3 or 4 in here, right? So Brittany story is number 4, Inheritance. So there's no way I'm going to put another horror story for another 2 or 3 stories. Like, so then I need to find, okay, what can this morph into? What can this come to next? And I also like putting, I'm never, shouldn't say never, but I try not to, if there's a 22-page story, I try not to put a 15 to 20-page story next. I'm going to try to put an 8 to 10-page story so that it kind of messes with the reader in terms of we have long horror, we have short western, we have medium-sized, sci-fi, then we have a weird hybrid that's only 8 pages, and then we've got a 24-page crime story. So it's so much about the fit in so yes, I absolutely encourage all of you guys to submit as many times as you would like. And in fact, weirdly, we don't have a no simultaneous submissions policy. A lot of people do. Okay. I always hated that because I think it's so ridiculous that, you know, um, I told the story a while back, but I sent off one story to Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I didn't think it would get in because I don't. They're more of a locked room, cozy mystery kind of thing, but still, it's Alfred Hitchcock, so it'd be nice to have that on the resume. And I sent it off, and they have no simultaneous submissions. They took 14 months to give me a no. I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what am I supposed to do seriously for 4? I mean, that kind of thing just drives me bananas, right? So with us, I never wanted to do that. So what will happen though, weirdly, is some people will submit like 2, 3 stories per issue, and even in that, I tell them, "Hey, you're more than welcome to do that, but just know that the chance of getting more than one story in the issue is probably zero." Right? Like you may end up getting one of these in, but there's no way that you're going to be featured twice in the same issue. So just understand that. But if you want to submit more than one, you can. So yeah, we're very open in terms of however many times you want to submit, and just because you've been accepted before, you can absolutely submit again. Having said that, one of the harder things I have to do as an editor, And as a writer, I didn't really know this, right? I was unaware. But once I became an editor, I realized that one of the hardest things I had to do was to say no to people who I really like and respect their work. You know, that sucks. That was one of the hardest things for me because, and also at the same time, it was one of the most important things I think I had to learn how to do because uh, I've had, like, for example, I had some writers, very talented writers, very good writers, submit to all four of the first four issues. And I mean, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna even if it's really good, I'm probably not going to publish you four times in a row. Like, at that point, it just becomes kind of silly, because there are hundreds of submissions here. So it's like, so yes, the short answer is absolutely submit as often as you want. The backstory is that there's a little bit more to it. Anybody else?
Maybe yeah, a
Yeah.
question from my end. I thought about that when Brian, when you said that your Western stories, they get like wilder and weirder with every story. I was wondering, like also for everyone here who like writes in different kind of genres, like how do you feel your style and your voice changes depending on like what kind of genre you're writing in? Because I felt like with this story, but also particularly, there's actually I wrote a follow-up story to this one. It's not really like a sequel, but it's like in the same universe and it's loosely connected, and that's also going to be published later this year in like a military horror kind of collection, which is actually something that I don't really read and particularly like, but like kind of the prompt spoke to me and not the story. And it's like it's completely bonkers. It's even more. It's way more insane than this story here, but it also felt like very freeing, and I felt like the voice was really different, and I was just off the rails, and also like stylistically very different, but also like free, and it kind of felt great, and I think it reads great. And then I returned to a story that I also wrote to work on that, and it's like a very straightforward uh, PI story, and I was really struggling with that because it felt a bit boring to me. Like it was really struggling to stylistically write in an interesting voice that I mean you can't in a very traditional story you can't. I mean maybe someone can, but at least I can't go completely crazy stylistically when the story is kind of very traditional and grounded. So yeah, how do you feel about that?
Anybody want to tackle that one? I have some things to say, but I don't need to say them right now. Anybody want to tackle that first, or?
I mean, I write, I have a lot of, all my stories are wildly different, which I feel like maybe it's from being fairly new to doing this. So, and I can't always tell when, I've had friends read stories and they feel like sometimes they have the same, there's something similar to them, but I'm editing one now about a girl going to a rich girl's pool party that's not genre at all. And I just finished a vampire story. So um, it's nice to hear that I'm not the only person because it feels like a lot of people have like a voice and they do a thing. Um, and mine, it's just very, I mean, that's again what I love about short stories is whatever comes to mind, I have an idea, I can write it and then move on to the next. Um, so it's not an answer necessarily, but I'm in the same boat where there's sometimes I think there's sometimes a more satisfying voice that I find with certain stories. But it's nice to know I'm not the only one, I guess, writing all different things.
Yeah.
Mm.
I,
Yeah.
I would say that for me, it varies a lot, Michael, a lot, depending on what I'm writing, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm a very for me, I'm not saying this applies to anybody else, but in my process, whatever that is, I when I'm writing a scene, uh, I am very visual about it. Like I'm seeing it in my head. I almost feel like I'm transcribing what I'm seeing. right? So when I write noir or crime, it tends to be much more kind of claustrophobic because you're in a dark alley. There's bricks all around, right? There's a dumpster. There's everything is very claustrophobic, right? And when I write a Western, totally different. You come to a top of a ridge and you can see what looks like 25 miles in one direction. All of a sudden, the way to write that becomes entirely different than how I was describing the alley, right? So the language I'm going to use tends to be very different based on what it is I'm writing. I tend to feel I use the expression when I write Westerns, I tend to kind of let it eat, right? With regards to the language and just kind of get a little poetic about things and things like that, because why not just have some fun with it? Whereas with the crime stuff, it's much more economical. It's much more claustrophobic, like I said. And it's not that I don't like writing that. I do. I love crime fiction. I love noir. It's just it's very different based on what it is, right? So so yes, for me it's the voice changes quite a bit, or the language and the attitude, I guess, change quite a bit.
I love the idea of the genre, like the landscape of the genre or the story you're writing affecting like the rhythm or like kind of the length of at the sentence level. That's a really cool idea. I hadn't thought about utilizing that as a way to kind of evoke a certain feeling in a writer. I know for me, one thing that I think always kind of like works its way into my stories is like, like I think like many or most of us, I write in third person usually, and like a close third person, right? So we're in third person, but we're really close to the to the central character or whoever the point of view character is. And so, one thing over the years that I tried to work really hard at was like limiting the scope of my language to what would be natural from that character's point of view. So it can depend or kind of oscillate a bit. Like in my novel, which is a kind of like it's set over like 3 days, and it's just this kind of like, just like this head rush of just like it's just action and violence, and there's a ticking time bomb and all of that kind of stuff, right? I really pare down on the prose and try to make it short and punchy and just sort of kind of in your face. But like at the same time, like I just had a short story that appeared in the Cincinnati Review alongside the Starlite Pulp publication, and in that story, it's different than Past Lives because it's about a 15-year-old kid in Las Vegas in the 90s who's obsessed with B movies and obsessed with this real life monster movie host that I used to love to watch in the 90s, Count Coolwriter, who was a kind of Elvis vampire late night Saturday night movie host. And so like, with the subject matter of the story, I just like it felt natural, and it was nice to have this be able to kind of rhapsodize about how great Planet of the Apes is, right? For half a page, right? Or things like, or just the amazingness of grainy VHS B movies. But that would be something, and that's something I'm earlier. I feel like in my writing career, I would allow myself to do no matter what the story was or who the characters are. But that's something I really try to be cognizant of limiting, depending on who the story's about and what is like the what do I want the reader to take away from it.
Yeah, and one of the most fascinating things about writing any style of writing, I guess not screenplays per se, Daniel, unless you want to correct me if I'm on this, but in fiction, one of the most fascinating choices a writer makes right away is first or third person. Unless you're going to be weird and write it in second person, which happens every once in a while. Bright Lights, Big City, I think is second person throughout the whole thing. Uh, Jay McInerney, right? But first person allows you to be so much darker in a lot of ways because and that was the whole uproar back in the day about The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson, right? Was that it wasn't just that this small town sheriff was horrible and killing people, it's that it was written in first person. So everything is I did this, I did that, I looked at her, I beat her, and people had a hard time with that. And that was kind of the shocking nature of it. But and then you look at a book like American Psycho, right? American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, and you talk about weird. First off, first off, the violence is outrageous, and it's in first person. But then he has whole chapters where he'll just talk about a musician. He has a whole chapter on Huey Lewis in the News. He has a whole chapter on Whitney Houston, and you can do that because it's first person. Third person, that would be weird. But first person, you're literally just expressing about the albums and what you're thinking about, right? And when you listen to them and things like that. Uh, and so, but really, I mostly write in third person. I used to when I first started fiction. I was more in first. As much as I think first person, you can make it more terrifying and more claustrophobic, I think, in a lot of ways. Uh, Third person allows you more freedom as a writer, you know? But then you can also mix it up. Like Michael, you mentioned James Lee Burke earlier. James Lee Burke writes everything in first person when he's writing from Dave Robichaux's perspective, but as soon as he's writing about Cleat or something going on in New Orleans, it's third person, right? So you the amazing thing is you always, like we were talking about earlier, right? Your stories, you can't break them. You always have the ability to change it up, you know? There's a portion in my new novel where the entire thing's in third person, and the first novel I wrote was in third person. The short stories I've written with Sonny have been in third person. So I wrote it in third person, but there was one section in it that I really, really vacillated on. Should I write this in first person? Should I switch here and go to first person? Because it would have been so much easier to write it in first person. Uh, this particular thing he's going through, he's just been drugged on something, and so everything is all kind of wacky for him. And writing that in first person makes a lot of sense. It's much more from a sensory perspective, it's much easier to do. And so yeah, I mean, that to me is one of the most fascinating choices that we make, you know? And some people only write in person, right? Some people only write in first person. And so what has been your guys' experience with that? Because most people, not all, but most people will do one and not dally too much in the others. Some people will be like, hey, I'm going to switch every other story, you know? So what do you
I
guys think?
find there's a lot of criticism editorial wise once you write in first person, even though it's what I really like to do, because the immediate response is anytime you write something that another character does is, well, how does your narrator know what that character's feeling? So I find it actually to be much more difficult, but I still think it's more fun to do first person. But it is more difficult if you're being very critical of that sort of style of writing. So
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
I like incorporating first person into dialogue. Say you have a character telling a story to another character, or using letters, things like that. Um, that's a good way to just change things up if you're just having a strict third person story. I find first person just as a full story often limiting, just for some of the reasons we stated already. But um, it is more challenging, but I think it could be more interesting character study if you go first person, just because now you're viewing what this crazy person or whatever this person has gone through. You see it through
Sure.
their eyes, and it could definitely do a lot more with that, though. I still enjoy third person. I like reading third person more too as well.
Well, the thing about first person, Caleb, is that a lot of the take the killer inside me, for example, or Catcher in the Rye, right? You go into the headspace of a certain character and you're freaking stuck there, right? Like that's all you get for the next 200 pages. And so it can be incredibly powerful in a lot of ways because you if it's trauma or if it's madness or if it's those kind of things, you're stuck there. And that's part of what makes like Holden Caulfield for me. Catcher in the Rye is a great book, okay, but to me he was always annoying. I've always found Holden to be incredibly annoying, and it's first person the whole time, and it is kind of he's just he pretty much gives the true meaning to unreliable narrator, right? And you get to do that as a first person because you see it through one person's lens, and that's it. Whereas with third person, you can still be an unreliable narrator, but it's different when you do it in that sense because people are expecting you to be a reliable narrator because you're expressing you're giving the opinions and thoughts of numerous characters. So, they're kind of expecting you to be truthful about what those people are thinking. Whereas when it's first person, you can be as out there as you want to be, and
I
get away.
think first person is a good way to be more relatable to the person reading it. So whereas I read Catcher in the Rye, I just wanted to smack the shit out of Holden Caulfield most of the time.
Yeah,
I can
totally.
see people, especially of the time period, though, relating to the character because maybe they have similar experiences, similar feelings, maybe a similar age, because I read that when I was older. So in that case, then the first person works way better for them than it would say for me. And it could, vice versa. That could work other ways around too.
Sure.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. I mean, I love the closeness of some first person works, and then Brian, to your point, that those books that are able to navigate the sort of the magic trick of the unreliable narrator. Like I mean, totally outside of the space, but I love the works of Kazuo Ishiguro, Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, and often, they're I don't know, I guess I can think of like at least three of his books that are from the first person perspective that is like they slowly bring you into the world and you as the reader realize like we're in a different place than what the narrator's been telling you, because from their perspective, there one thing's happening and you realize that's not quite the full spectrum of things. I find I almost never write in first person. The last story I wrote, it made sense to have it be a first person perspective there. And I found it really challenging, both in terms of Caleb was saying the limitations of like the language, right? This was another story about a teenage kid, and so it's like I'm limiting the language purely to like that's
For sure.
really tough, kind of on that level. But then the story itself was, I mean, I thought it would be a short, kind of a brief story. And it's sort of my take on Joyce Carol Oates' "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" The story about which was itself was based on the 50s rock and roll serial killer Charles Schmid. And the story just took on a life of its own, and it ended up, after editing, I think it's final where it's at a 10,000, a really long 10,000 word short story. And just, it was so hard to live in that headspace, not to be too precious about it, but it was just, I'm a slow writer and I labor over things and I edit things. And I lived in this space for weeks and weeks. And at the end of it, it was just, I mean, it was like I found myself kind of taking a toll on my just my day-to-day feelings of, because the story itself is not just when you sit down at like the proverbial typewriter, right? It's like, it's something that I'm thinking about and carrying with me all day long.
Yeah.
And so that's tough to, like, that flip side, which I never before considered really from the writer perspective. It can be hard to live in that brutal space when you were so close to this consciousness, right? That is
For sure.
problematic.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I actually just finished a scene a couple weeks ago where Sonny wakes up and he's just in a shitty mood, just straight up. He wants a drink. He's trying to be sober. He's in a shitty mood. If he looks at a flower, he wants it to wither. If somebody tells him choose your attitude, he wants to punch him in the face. It's like it's just he just wakes up in a bad mood. And I wrote that, and I wrote it, and then I edited it, and I edited it, and it took a few days. And I realized it actually affected my mood. Like I was kind of pissed the whole time while I'm writing it, and I was commenting to my wife. I'm like, sorry, but but it does. It can mess with you.
What I had a couple of times, have to admit, is that for whatever reason, when I wrote a particular scene, that I suddenly realized that I slipped into first person, even though I was writing third person. I have no idea how this happens, but sometimes you're so drawn in, and suddenly, I'd written I, and I have no idea why, so I had to go back all the way and re-edit it. And because, like, deep down, I think it's because I really, really like first person narration, but it's like Lucas and Shane also said, I think it's really, really hard to pull off well. For me, like one of my most favorite tropes in crime fiction is the wisecracking detective. If I'm really honest, like, and this works only really well if you're in the first person, and if that is really well done, it's like the best thing for me in the world. Like, I didn't really grow up like with the classics in the noir detective genre, but more like with the neo noir stuff. Like I think what really brought me to crime fiction was the early Dennis Lehane novels, like the Kenzie Gennaro novels, and I loved that voice so much, like of Kenzie's character. It's just really drew me in so much, and I just loved the wisecracks. And I have a story I'm writing, I'm working on since I don't know, I've been working on for 3 years now or something, which is like first person and has a wisecracking character. And I just keep pushing off finishing the story because I'm like really scared that it's not working. Because like it's to be funny. I think it's probably the hardest thing, like said Brian, one of the hardest things to pull off in writing is to be scary. But I think even harder is to be really funny. I think that's a talent you either have or you don't. I think that's a very hard thing to pull off.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's true. And one thing that I want to point out, another first person narrator I'm just thinking about is the novel's called The Getaway Man. And when we talk about limiting, it's by Andrew Vaux, okay, who I love as a writer. His short stuff, by the way, Everybody Pays, Born Bad, just amazing. It is so dark. He was actually an attorney, okay? He was an attorney who represented children who had been either abused or trafficked or things like that. So you can only imagine the things that he has heard, right? And had to deal with. And a lot of that comes out in his short fiction. And it is crazy dark. But the point is that in The Getaway Man, he writes it from first person perspective the entire time for a wheelman, right? A driver who does, heists and stuff like that. But he's really not smart. I mean, I'm talking probably 80 IQ. Okay. And the book, he pulls it off, but the book is really annoying at times because the guy, he just doesn't have the vocabulary. You know what I mean? He's not bright. And the whole thing is written first person. And so talk about unreliable narrator for sure, but he's unreliable because he doesn't get what's going on around him all the time, right? Like there's all these machinations and all these con men around him and things like that are pulling things off on him, and he doesn't realize it. And it's up to you as a reader to realize he's being taken all the time. But it's frustrating too because he doesn't realize it, and you're him essentially for the course of the novel. So it is interesting how effective first person can be, but also like we've mentioned, how limiting it can be as well, right? So you better be good. It needs to work. You know what I mean? It really needs to work if you're going to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and talking about you better be good. I've taken classes and you read other people's stories. And another thing with first person is just how do you change just sentence to sentence? Because I've read stories where it's like, I did this, I did this, I did, and you really, it's a challenge, probably a good one to like, make yourself write first person and not use but I've read stories where it's just, sentence to sentence. I did this, then I
Yeah.
did, then I did that. So
A really good exercise, to be honest, not that we have the time for this and not that anybody wants to do this, but a really good exercise from a writing perspective would be to write a story in third person and then write it again in first person from the protagonist's eyes and watch what changes over the course of those two versions, right? Because what you had in the original, you can't have a lot of that in the first person version. So you're gonna the way you write it and the process and the processing as a writer that you have to go through is going to be totally different. So be a good exercise. I'm not saying I want to do it right now, but it really would be.
I know a playwright who does that for all his characters.
Nice.
And understand them, will get into their voice. And that's funny because I recommended it to a friend of mine who was struggling with a piece that he write a couple chapters of it first person so that he could understand the story from the point of view of his main character in a different way. And I think he liked it. I think he liked doing it. Now he wants to combine the two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, look, even, I've found ways and tricks with the Sunny novels now to they're third person, but I oftentimes find myself thinking from the perspective of Sunny. And I don't say I, but it's still oftentimes the way that it comes across is it's still third person, but it really has echoes of being first person at the same
But
time.
it's that thing where I don't know who said it, but you you tell a story. Someone in the story tells a story. Like Lord Jim is first person, goes into, but it becomes third person as he's telling the story. And then when Jim shows up, he tells his stories and it goes back to first person, but from his point of view. And Conrad does that a lot. He just kind of effortlessly just
Yeah.
keeps moving the story in a way that keeps you engaged and allows you the intimacy of first person without having to get stuck in it.
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's personally that Daniel, I think that's the goal is to write in third person, but to get the intimacy of first person in it.
Yeah.
And that takes a certain art, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. So we're gonna end this. Hang on with me for just a second. Those of you who have those anybody out there who's watching this who has powered through this entire thing, you guys are awesome. We appreciate you. This is Starlight Pulp review number 6. If you have the opportunity, pick it up. These guys all have stories in it. The feedback on this review, both well, this one in particular, both 5 and 6 have been pretty outstanding at this point, and it's a good collection of stories. These guys are awesome. So pick up a copy, and also submissions open August 1st for Starlight Pulp review number 7. So look forward to taking a look at those. I'll have a video with the submission guidelines up on the site in the next week or so. And then also Daniel Pyne down there at the bottom of the screen. This is his novel 29 Palms coming out in August. So pre-orders are available now. By the time this is up and running, it'll either be out or close to it. So pick that up if you can. And thanks so much.
In this topsy turvy